Captain Daniel Mercer was a man who thrived on discipline, precision, and control. Flying had been his passion since childhood, and he had built a life around it. It was a routine flight from New York to Los Angeles. Daniel arrived at JFK Airport 2 hours before takeoff, as always. His co-pilot, Jason Wells, greeted him with a nod. "All set, Captain?" Daniel forced a smile, even though something was gnawing at him. "Always." As they began pre-flight checks, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Frowning, he stepped away from the cockpit and answered. "Hello?" A man's voice came through, low, hesitant. "Is this Daniel Mercer?" Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. "Yes. Who is this?" A pause. Then, "I need to tell you something about your wife." Daniel's stomach dropped. His pulse accelerated. The man hesitated, then said something that made the world tilt beneath Daniel's feet. "She's cheating on you." Silence. For a moment, the noise of the bustling airport faded. All he could hear was the thundering of his own heartbeat. "What?" Daniel's voice was low, controlled. The man exhaled sharply. "I've been seeing her. I didn't know she was married, until now." Daniel's vision blurred. The cockpit door felt too close, too suffocating. His wife. The woman he had built a life with. Cheating? On him? "How do I know you're not lying?" Daniel demanded. The man's answer was a dagger straight to his chest. "Check her phone. Check her messages. You'll see for yourself." Then, the line went dead. Daniel stood there, phone clutched in his white-knuckled grip. A mix of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak crashed over him. He wanted to call Emily right then and there. Wanted to demand the truth. Wanted to see the proof. But there was no time. Passengers were boarding. He was about to be 30,000 feet in the air with hundreds of lives in his hands. This wasn't just a domestic issue. This was a ticking bomb inside his chest. And as he walked back into the cockpit, Jason glanced at him. "You good, Captain?" Daniel forced himself to nod. But the truth? Nothing would ever be good again. Daniel Mercer had always prided himself on being a man of control. He had trained for years to handle pressure, to make quick decisions in life-or-death situations. He could predict weather changes, navigate through dangerous storms, and land a plane in near-zero visibility. But nothing in his thousands of flight hours had prepared him for this. For the moment he found out his wife had betrayed him, just minutes before takeoff. Now, he was trapped inside the cockpit of a Boeing 787, responsible for 347 passengers. And he had to pretend that his entire world hadn't just collapsed. "Captain, we're ready for pushback?" Jason Wells, his co-pilot, was watching him closely. Daniel nodded, forcing himself to focus. He went through the motions, radioing ground control, checking instrument readings, confirming departure details. His hands were steady. His voice was calm. But inside, he was on the brink of breaking. "Check her phone. Check her messages. You'll see for yourself." The stranger's words were like a ticking time bomb in his head. How long had this been going on? Who was this man? Was it just one affair, or had there been others? "Cleared for takeoff," Jason said, his voice bringing Daniel back to the present. Daniel gripped the throttle, pushing it forward. The engines roared to life. The plane accelerated down the runway, the force pushing him back into his seat. In a few seconds, they were airborne. And just like that, he was stuck, 30,000 feet above the ground, trapped in the cockpit, with no escape from his own mind. For the first hour of the flight, Daniel managed to keep it together. He went through routine check-ins, monitoring altitude, fuel consumption, and wind speeds. But the moment the plane reached cruising altitude, his mind began to spiral. Emily. He had never once suspected her, never thought she was capable of betraying him. And now, the woman he had trusted with his life had been sleeping with another man behind his back. He clenched his jaw so hard his teeth hurt. Jason glanced at him. "You okay?" Daniel forced a nod. "Yeah, just a headache." Jason smirked. "Long night?" Daniel nearly laughed. "Yeah, the longest night of my life." 2 hours into the flight, the plane hit a patch of turbulence. Daniel had handled worse before. But today, he wasn't thinking clearly. He overcorrected the plane's position, gripping the yoke too tightly. The aircraft tilted slightly, and the passengers felt the sudden shift. A flight attendant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a bit of turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Jason frowned. That was a little rough, don't you think? Daniel ignored him. His fingers trembled over the controls. His breath was shallow. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. "Check her phone. Check her messages. You'll see for yourself." The words were eating him alive. Jason sighed. "I'll take over for a bit. Go stretch. You look like you need some air." Daniel hesitated. But he knew. If he stayed in that seat any longer, he was going to lose it. He unbuckled his harness and left the cockpit, stepping into the narrow hallway leading to the first-class cabin. Flight attendants greeted him, but he barely heard them. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he opened the messaging app. His heart pounded. He hesitated. Then, he went to Emily's chat, scrolled up, and saw nothing. Just normal conversations. Dinner plans. Goodnight messages. "I love yous." His stomach twisted. But then he remembered. The unknown caller had said to check her messages. Not with him. With other people. His fingers shook as he went to her archived chats. And then, he found it. A chat with a contact named Jay. A name he didn't recognize. His blood ran ice cold. He clicked it open. And what he saw destroyed him. "Jay, can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible. Emily, me too. I miss you already. Jay, you looked so sexy in that dress. Wish I could have kept you in bed all day. Emily, you have no idea how hard it was to leave you. Jay, next time, stay longer." He doesn't have to know. Emily, I know. He never checks my phone. Daniel felt like he had been punched in the chest. His hands gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. His wife. The woman he had protected, provided for, loved unconditionally, had been sleeping with another man behind his back, and she had never planned to stop. The airplane felt too small, too suffocating. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't, because he was still the captain of this flight, because 347 lives depended on him, because even though his personal life was in flames, he still had a job to do. He closed the messages, shoving his phone back into his pocket. Then, with one final breath, he straightened his posture and walked back into the cockpit. But this time, he wasn't the same man who had taken off from New York. This time, he was a man with a mission to make her pay. Daniel Mercer had always prided himself on remaining calm under pressure. A good pilot had to be disciplined, methodical, and emotionally stable, especially at 30,000 feet in the air. But right now, his entire world was collapsing. His wife of 11 years had been sleeping with another man, and the proof was in his hands. Explicit messages, secret meetings, plans to lie to his face indefinitely. Every word he read had been a dagger to his chest. And yet, despite the rage boiling inside him, he had a plane to land, a responsibility to the 347 souls on board who had no idea that their captain was moments away from losing control. Daniel forced himself back into the cockpit, his face carefully composed. Jason Wells glanced at him, immediately noticing something was off. "Hey man, you okay?" Daniel gripped the yoke of the plane, staring straight ahead. "Fine." Jason studied him for a moment. "You don't look fine." Daniel exhaled sharply. His hands felt numb. His chest was tight, suffocating. His head was pounding with the weight of the truth. His wife had been screwing another man while he had been flying across the country, thinking she was at home waiting for him. He clenched his jaw. Jason sighed, reaching for his water bottle. "I'll take over for a bit. You should get some rest." Daniel nearly laughed. Rest? How could he rest when the woman he loved had destroyed their life together? How could he breathe when every second was spent reliving the moment he saw those messages? Still, he nodded. "Yeah," he muttered. "Thanks." He unbuckled his harness and stepped out of the cockpit. But he didn't go to rest. He went to dig deeper. Daniel sat in the crew rest area, his hands trembling as he opened Emily's phone records. He needed to know everything. How long had this been going on? How often had she been lying to him? Who the hell was Jay? His fingers moved quickly, searching her call history. And then there it was. a number that appeared over and over again. Every time Daniel had been out of town on flights, every time he had been trusting her, loving her, believing she was faithful, his stomach churned. He copied the number and ran a reverse search. And when the name appeared on the screen, his blood ran cold. James Carter, his wife's personal trainer. Daniel's mind reeled. James had been training Emily for the past 2 years. A younger guy, handsome, charming, and always just a little too friendly. Daniel had never thought much of it. Why would he? Emily had been his wife, his partner. She was supposed to be his, not his personal trainer's, not some guy she met at the gym. A slow, dark rage boiled inside him. He wanted to hit something, wanted to destroy something, wanted to watch the world burn just as she had burned their marriage to the ground. But instead, he just sat there, breathing, waiting, planning, because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 2 hours later, the flight began its descent into LAX. Daniel returned to the cockpit, his face carefully blank. Jason was already making final landing preparations. All good? Jason asked, his tone light. Daniel nodded. But inside? Inside, he was a storm waiting to break. As he gripped the controls, guiding the plane toward a smooth, textbook-perfect landing, a realization settled over him. He had spent years perfecting his skills as a pilot. His entire career had been about control. And now, he was going to use that same control to dismantle Emily's life, piece by piece. Because when Daniel Mercer landed this plane, the real turbulence would begin. Daniel Mercer executed the perfect landing at LAX, the wheels of the Boeing 787 touching down smoothly on the tarmac. To everyone on board, it was just another routine flight. To Daniel, it was the moment everything changed. He had spent the last 6 hours trapped in his own mind, fluctuating between heartbreak, rage, and the overwhelming need for revenge. And now, he was back on the ground, and Emily had no idea what was coming for her. After disembarking, Daniel walked through the airport in a fog of fury, gripping his phone. His hands itched to call her, to demand she explain herself, to force her to say it out loud. Instead, he did something different. He called James Carter, his wife's personal trainer, the man who had been sleeping with her. The phone rang. Once, twice, then, hello? Daniel's blood boiled at the casual, unsuspecting voice. For a moment, he said nothing, just breathed. Then, in a voice calm as a quiet storm, he spoke. I know. A pause. Then, James exhaled sharply. Who is this? Daniel smiled darkly. Emily's husband. Silence. Daniel could hear the panic in the way James breathed. Look, man. Daniel cut him off. Don't bother lying. I read the messages. I know everything. Another silence. This time, longer. Then James muttered, shit. Daniel clenched his jaw. Yeah, shit is right. James stammered. I didn't know she was still with you, man. She told me you were basically done. That you were? Daniel laughed bitterly. Still married. Still paying for our home. Still loving her while she was screwing you? James swallowed hard. Listen, I don't care. Daniel's voice turned lethal. You're nothing. A mistake she made. And soon, she's going to regret it more than you ever will. Then, without another word, Daniel hung up. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clear. Emily thought she had control. But now, he was the one in control. Daniel walked through the airport parking lot, his hands tightening into fists. He could go home right now. He could storm into their house, throw her bags onto the street, scream at her until her perfect world shattered. But that would be too easy. No, Daniel wasn't going to give Emily the luxury of an emotional outburst. He was going to drag this out, make her feel safe, make her believe she still had the upper hand. And then, he was going to ruin her. Instead of going home, Daniel checked into a hotel nearby. He needed time. Time to think. Time to plan. Time to become the man who would dismantle Emily's life with precision. He poured himself a drink and stared at his phone. Then, he sent her a text. Daniel, landed safe. Miss you. It was the first lie in a game she didn't even know had begun. Daniel Mercer had never been a deceptive man. His entire career as a pilot was built on honesty, discipline, and precision. But now, he was becoming something else entirely. Something dangerous. Because while Emily thought she was getting away with betrayal, Daniel was already plotting her downfall. And when the time came, she wouldn't just lose her husband. She would lose everything. Daniel arrived home just after midnight. Their house was quiet, untouched, like nothing had changed. But it had. Everything had. He stepped inside, setting his bag down slowly. Emily's voice called out from the bedroom. "Daniel? That you?" His chest tightened. The woman he loved, the woman he thought was his partner, was in their bed. But now, he knew she had shared that same bed with another man. His fingers curled into a fist. "Yeah," he called back. Emily appeared in the doorway, her hair messy from sleep, her lips curving into a soft smile. "You're home early." He forced himself to smile back. "Yeah." Flight was smooth. She walked toward him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Daniel stiffened, because for the first time ever, her touch felt disgusting. "I missed you," she whispered. He almost laughed. Instead, he pressed a kiss to her forehead and whispered back, "Me too." Step 1. Gaining access. While Emily slept peacefully beside him, Daniel stared at the ceiling, awake. He had already seen some of the messages, already confirmed the affair, but he needed more. He needed proof that would bury her. So, with careful movements, he reached over to her nightstand, grabbing her phone. It was locked. Of course it was. But Daniel was a pilot, and pilots were trained to solve problems. He turned to Emily, studying her sleeping form. Then, he carefully lifted her hand, pressing her thumb against the screen. Click. Unlocked. His heart pounded as he scrolled through her messages. And what he found made his blood boil. Step 2. The deeper betrayal. There were hundreds of messages, months of lies, photos, videos. "Emily, I can't wait to see you again." "James, wish I could be the one you woke up to every morning." "Emily, one day, maybe soon." "James, does he suspect anything?" "Emily, not at all. Daniel trusts me completely." Daniel gritted his teeth. He had trusted her, and she had laughed about it. Step 3. The ultimate setup. Daniel placed the phone back on the nightstand, his mind spinning. It wasn't enough to just confront her. That would be too quick, too easy. No, he wanted her to experience true panic. So he grabbed his own phone and started planning. He saved every photo, message, and call log. He forwarded the messages to himself. He recorded the worst ones, where she admitted everything. And when he was done, he smiled. Because Emily Carter had no idea that her world was about to collapse. Daniel Mercer had spent years keeping people safe, ensuring smooth landings, and maintaining absolute control in the cockpit. Now, for the first time, he was about to crash something on purpose. Not a plane, but his wife's life. And the best part? She wouldn't even know it was happening until it was too late. Step 1. Planting doubt. The morning after his return, Emily was her usual self. She kissed him goodbye like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't been sleeping with another man for months. Like she hadn't been sending messages promising him a future. Daniel played along, smiling, acting normal, letting her believe she was safe. But behind that smile, he was already pulling the strings. Sabotage move number 1. The message trap. After Emily left for her morning workout, Daniel used her phone again. This time, he forwarded some of her messages to her best friend, Sarah. Emily to James, "I wish I could just leave him, but he's too good to me." Emily to James, "I love our time together more than anything. I hate lying to Daniel, but I hate living with him more." Then, he deleted the evidence that the messages had ever been sent. Now, her own best friend was about to find out the truth. And the best part? Emily would have no idea how. Sabotage move number 2. The financial block. Emily had no idea how much of their finances Daniel controlled. So he made a small, but brutal adjustment. He froze their joint account. It wouldn't raise immediate red flags. But when she tried to use their card for her next personal training session with James, she'd be in for a shock. He smiled, picturing it. Her swiping her card. It declining. Her face turning red with embarrassment. A small taste of the humiliation that was coming. Sabotage move number 3. The meeting that would ruin her. The final step of his morning? Daniel called Emily's boss. She worked in marketing for an upscale fashion brand, a job she cared about almost as much as her affair. "Hey, Alex," Daniel said, keeping his tone casual. "I wanted to give you a heads up about something." "Of course, Captain Mercer. What's up?" "I know you work closely with Emily. There's something you should see." Daniel forwarded some of Emily's more inappropriate messages. Ones where she talked about ditching work for her side fun. Ones where she admitted to faking sick days to meet James. Ones where she trashed her own company. Alex's voice was tight with frustration when he responded. "Daniel, this is bad. If this gets out—" "I trust you to handle it," Daniel said smoothly. He knew exactly what would happen. Emily was about to walk into work, oblivious to the fact that her entire career was hanging by a thread, and he was going to enjoy every second of it. That afternoon, Daniel was relaxing in their living room, sipping coffee when Emily stormed through the front door. Her face was flushed. Her breathing was uneven. And best of all, there was fear in her eyes. "What the hell is going on?" she demanded. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" She threw her phone onto the couch. "Sarah won't talk to me. My boss gave me a warning about unprofessional behavior, but wouldn't tell me how he found out. And our card got declined at the gym." Daniel's heart soared. He shrugged. "That's weird." Emily ran a frustrated hand through her hair. "Weird? This all happened in one day." "Bad luck, I guess," he said, taking another sip of coffee. Her eyes narrowed. For the first time, he saw doubt creeping into her expression, like she was starting to suspect something, like she could feel her world shifting beneath her feet. And that was exactly what he wanted. Because this wasn't even the real revenge. This was just the beginning. Emily Mercer had always believed she was in control. She was smart, careful, and good at lying. For months, she had juggled her affair with James perfectly, balancing her marriage with Daniel while sneaking away whenever she wanted. She had thought she was untouchable. But now, her life was falling apart faster than she could understand. Her best friend, Sarah, wasn't answering her calls. Her boss had suddenly become distant, offering a vague warning, but refusing to explain. And when she tried to pay for her next training session with James, her card was declined. She had tried to play it off, laughing awkwardly as she told James, "Oops, must be a bank error." But the truth? It wasn't just a bank error. Something was wrong. Something big. And Emily was starting to feel afraid. By the time she got home that evening, her nerves were shot. She walked into the house, half expecting Daniel to confront her, to accuse her, to demand the truth. Instead, she found him sitting calmly on the couch, sipping whiskey. His posture was relaxed. Too relaxed. "Hey, babe," he said smoothly, looking up at her. "Rough day?" Emily hesitated. Her instincts were screaming that something was off, but she forced herself to play it cool. "Yeah," she sighed, dropping her bag on the table. "Just a weird day." Daniel tilted his head, feigning concern. "Weird how?" Emily hesitated. Should she tell him? No. She had to be careful, because something wasn't right. Instead, she forced a smile. "Just work stress," she said lightly. Daniel nodded, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Makes sense." Emily studied him, searching for any sign that he knew something. But his face was completely unreadable. And that terrified her more than anything. That night, as Emily lay in bed, scrolling through her phone, she received a message from an unknown number. "Unknown. How long did you think you could get away with it?" Her heart stopped. She sat up, eyes wide. "Emily, who is this?" "Unknown. Does it matter?" "Emily, what do you want?" "Unknown. You'll find out soon enough." Her fingers trembled as she gripped her phone. She looked over at Daniel, who was sleeping peacefully beside her. At least, he looked like he was sleeping. Emily's stomach twisted. Who the hell had sent that message? Was it Sarah? Her boss? Or was it Daniel? Her breathing became shallow. Was he playing her? Had he found out? Her skin went cold. For the first time, Emily felt true fear, and she had no idea what was coming next. Meanwhile, in the darkness of the night, Daniel lay awake. Emily had no idea that he had been watching her panic. No idea that he had sent that anonymous message himself. Because this wasn't just about scaring her. This was about breaking her. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, the real storm would begin. Because by the time Emily woke up, she wouldn't just be paranoid. She would be exposed. For the entire world to see. Emily Mercer had spent her entire life crafting the perfect image. A loving wife. A successful career woman. A respected figure in her social circles. But today, that image was about to be shattered. Because Daniel had been planning this moment for days. And now, it was time for her public execution. At exactly 8 a.m., a carefully constructed email was sent out to dozens of people. Her boss, her closest friends, her family, and worst of all, to James' wife. The subject line was simple. The truth about Emily Mercer. Inside the email were screenshots of texts, photos, and explicit messages between Emily and James. Every lie, every betrayal, every promise of a future without Daniel. It was undeniable. And once it was out, there was no taking it back. Emily had no idea what had happened. Not at first. She woke up groggy, reaching for her phone. She had 27 missed calls. Her messages were flooded. And as soon as she opened them, her heart stopped. Sarah. What the actual F***, Emily, Mom, you disgust me. Don't bother calling. Boss, we need to talk. Immediately. Her hands shook violently as she scrolled through the messages. Then she saw it. The email. She clicked it open, and when she saw the evidence, she screamed. She stumbled out of bed, nearly dropping her phone. No, 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 no. She gasped. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She turned to Daniel, who was standing by the doorway, fully dressed, sipping coffee. He was calm. Too calm. What did you do? She demanded, voice shaking. Daniel took another sip, smirking. I just told the truth. Emily's breath hitched. You sent this? Daniel's smile widened. Oh no, sweetheart. You sent it. I just made sure the right people saw it. Her vision blurred. Everything was spinning. Her friends knew. Her family knew. Her boss knew. And James' wife knew. Her affair wasn't a secret anymore. It was a public execution. Her phone rang. It was her boss, Alex. Her fingers trembled as she answered. Emily, I don't even know what to say. Alex's voice was cold, disgusted. She started. You're fired, he interrupted. The words slammed into her chest like a bullet. No, please. Your behavior is unacceptable. We can't have this kind of scandal attached to the company. Alex, please, I didn't. Save it, he snapped. HR will send you the termination paperwork today. Lose my number. The line went dead. Emily stood frozen, the phone slipping from her hand. Her job, her career, gone. And when she turned back to Daniel, he was still watching her, enjoying every second of her fall. Emily was sobbing now. You ruined me, she screamed. Daniel tilted his head. No, Emily. He walked toward her slowly, his voice dark, chilling. You ruined yourself. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the floor, her body shaking. Daniel crouched beside her, lowering his voice to a whisper. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think you could cheat, lie, and humiliate me without consequences? She choked on her own breath. I didn't mean. You didn't mean to get caught, he corrected. Emily sobbed harder. She had nothing left. No husband, no job, no reputation. And the best part? Daniel wasn't even finished yet. Because next, she was going to lose the last thing she had left. Her home. And when she had nothing but regret, Daniel would walk away, without looking back. Emily Mercer had spent years making their house a home. The elegant decor, the framed wedding photos, the carefully chosen furniture. Everything in this house had once felt safe. Now, it was a prison, a place where her life had collapsed in a matter of hours. Her husband hated her. Her career was gone. Her friends had abandoned her. And the worst part? She was about to lose the house too. Emily was still sitting on the floor, eyes red from crying, when Daniel calmly walked to the front door. He opened it. Then, he turned back to her. Get out. Emily's chest tightened. What? She whispered. Daniel sighed, shaking his head. Do I need to spell it out for you? Pack your things. You're not staying here. Emily shook her head violently. No, Daniel, please. We can fix this. Daniel laughed coldly. Fix this? His face darkened. You didn't make a mistake, Emily. You made a choice. Over and over again. She crawled toward him on her knees, desperate. I have nowhere to go. Not my problem, he said. Her hands trembled. Daniel, please, just let me explain. I read the messages. He cut her off. Emily's breath hitched. I know everything. Her stomach dropped. Daniel leaned down, voice low and venomous. You don't get to beg me for mercy. Not after what you did. She sobbed. I love you. Daniel's expression was deadly. You love yourself, Emily. That's the only thing you've ever loved. Then, he stepped aside. The door was wide open, waiting for her to leave. Emily looked at the doorway, then back at Daniel. She saw no remorse in his eyes. No softness. Nothing. Her hands shook violently as she stood up. You really want me gone, she whispered. Daniel tilted his head. You were already gone the moment you let another man touch you. Emily let out a broken sob. She had thought she could fix this. She had thought he would still love her enough to forgive her. But now, she realized the truth. She had already lost him, and it was too late to change that. With trembling hands, Emily grabbed a suitcase. She stuffed clothes into it mindlessly, tears still falling down her face. Her hands hovered over their wedding photo on the dresser. She wanted to take it, wanted to cling to something of him, but she knew Daniel wouldn't let her. So she left it behind. As she walked to the door, she turned one last time. I really did love you, she whispered. Daniel didn't even flinch. Too bad that doesn't mean a damn thing anymore. And with that, she stepped outside. The door slammed shut behind her, locking her out of his life forever. Emily had always thought she could control everything. Her marriage, her career, her affair. But now, she was sitting in a cheap motel room, staring at the ceiling, realizing just how wrong she had been. Everything was gone. Her job? Terminated. Her friends? Vanished. Her family? Ashamed. Her home? Taken from her. And Daniel? He had erased her like she had never existed. She had called, texted, begged for one last chance. He never answered. Because to him, she was already dead. The only person who still answered her calls was James Carter. The man she had risked everything for. The man who had helped destroy her life. But when she called him now, even he was turning away. Emily, we need to stop talking. Her stomach twisted. What? James, no. You're all I have left. You don't get it, he sighed. My wife is divorcing me. She's taking half of everything. I lost my gym contract because of this scandal. My life is falling apart. Emily closed her eyes. Mine too, she whispered. But James' voice was cold. Yeah? Well, I don't want to burn with you. Then, he hung up. Emily stared at the dead phone screen. She had thought James would be her future. Now, he wouldn't even answer her calls. She had thrown away a good man for nothing. And now, she was truly alone. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Daniel was moving forward. Emily's name was blocked from his phone. Her belongings? Gone from his house. Her memory? Erased. For months, he had been trapped in heartbreak. But now, he was free. And as he stood on his apartment balcony, looking out over the city, he exhaled. Because some stories don't end in forgiveness. Some stories end with a door closing forever. And Daniel Mercer had just closed that door. For good. Thank you for listening to the story to the end. Please like, share your thoughts and subscribe to the channel.